In the shimmering heat of Alexandria, where the lighthouse pierced the sky like a Titan's spear, and the great library held the world's wisdom in its marble halls, one woman wielded beauty as a weapon and intellect as armor to challenge the might of Rome itself. Cleopatra VII. Philopator, the last pharaoh of Egypt, was born in 69 BCE into a dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries. Yet she would prove to be not merely its final chapter, but its most incandescent flame, a queen who understood that in the game of empires, seduction could prove mightier than armies. The blood of Alexander's general Ptolemy flowed through her veins, carrying with it the ambitions of Macedonian conquerors who had claimed Egypt as their prize and made themselves gods in the eyes of its people. But where her ancestors had been content to rule from their gilded palaces, speaking only Greek and viewing their Egyptian subjects as useful cattle, Cleopatra possessed a revolutionary understanding. True power required not just dominion over bodies, but sovereignty over hearts and minds. From childhood, she absorbed languages like a sponge drinks water, becoming the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years to speak Egyptian alongside Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and the tongues of Ethiopia and Arabia. Her tutors marveled as she devoured treatises on mathematics, philosophy, and rhetoric, with the same appetite that other princesses reserved for jewelry and silk. By the age of 12, she could debate Aristotelian logic in the morning and compose poetry in 3 languages by evening, her brilliant mind already calculating the moves that would define her reign. When her father, Ptolemy V, died in 51 BCE, leaving her to rule alongside her younger brother Ptolemy IV, according to Ptolemaic tradition, Cleopatra understood immediately that shared power was no power at all. The 18-year-old queen gazed upon Alexandria's harbor, where Roman grain ships waited like patient vultures, and recognized that Egypt's greatest asset, its agricultural wealth, had become the chain that bound it to Rome's appetite. Freedom would require not military resistance, which had failed every previous challenger, but a more subtle conquest. The civil war that erupted between the siblings provided her first opportunity to demonstrate the lethal combination of intelligence and audacity that would become her signature. When Ptolemy III's advisors drove her from Alexandria, convinced that a teenage girl posed no threat to their regency, they fatally underestimated the mind behind those dark eyes. Cleopatra retreated to Upper Egypt not as a refugee, but as a general, raising an army and preparing for the campaign that would establish her as sole ruler. Julius Caesar's arrival in Alexandria in pursuit of his rival Pompey transformed a dynastic squabble into an opportunity for historical immortality. The most powerful man in the world had come to Egypt seeking an enemy's head, but Cleopatra understood that he represented something far more valuable, a pathway to Roman favor that could secure her throne and her kingdom's independence. The question was not whether to approach him, but how to do so in a manner that would capture his legendary attention. The carpet, or perhaps the linen sack, as some accounts suggest, that concealed her smuggled entry into Caesar's presence became history's most famous prop in a performance that would echo through millennia. When the wrappings fell away to reveal not a trembling supplicant but a poised young queen who spoke to him in perfect Latin, Caesar found himself face to face with an intellect that matched his own. She had gambled everything on a single moment of theater, and the stakes could not have been higher. Their first conversation lasted through the night, 2 brilliant minds recognizing kindred ambition across the divide of cultures. She spoke not of Egypt's weakness, but of its potential, not of her need for protection, but of the partnership she could offer. When she described the wealth that flowed down the Nile and the strategic importance of Alexandria's position, Caesar saw not a client kingdom, but an empire's greatest prize. By dawn, the conqueror of Gaul had found his match in a queen who understood that submission could be a form of victory. The affair that blossomed between them transcended mere physical attraction, though contemporary accounts suggest her beauty was indeed remarkable. Not the conventional prettiness of court favorites, but the magnetic presence of a woman who commanded attention through sheer force of personality. Plutarch would write that her voice was like a lyre with many strings, capable of speaking to any soul in its native tongue, while her wit could charm philosophers and her wisdom could counsel generals. Caesar's support secured her throne, but at a price that would define the remainder of her reign. Egypt became a Roman protectorate in all but name, its independence dependent on the continued favor of its powerful patron. Yet Cleopatra transformed this apparent defeat into the foundation of a grander strategy. If Egypt must depend on Rome, then she would ensure that Rome came to depend on Egypt, and on her personally, in ways that would make their relationship indispensable. The birth of Caesarion in 47 BCE added another dimension to their alliance, though the child's paternity would remain a source of speculation for historians. Whether or not Caesar was truly the father mattered less than Cleopatra's skillful use of the boy as a symbol of her connection to Roman power. She understood that in politics, perception often mattered more than reality, and the perception that she had borne Caesar's heir made her both more valuable and more dangerous to Rome's future leaders. When Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE shattered the Roman Republic, Cleopatra found herself once again calculating odds and planning moves in a game where the stakes had grown exponentially higher. The civil wars that followed would determine not only who ruled Rome, but whether Egypt would survive as an independent kingdom or become another Roman province. Her choice of ally in this conflict would prove to be both her greatest triumph and her ultimate tragedy. Mark Antony represented everything Caesar had not. Where the dictator had been calculating and disciplined, Antony was passionate and impulsive. Where Caesar had viewed their relationship as a political convenience, Antony would fall genuinely and catastrophically in love. When she sailed to meet him at Tarsus in 41 BCE, Cleopatra orchestrated perhaps the most spectacular seduction in recorded history. The golden barge that carried her up the Cydnus River was no mere vessel, but a floating palace designed to overwhelm the senses and announce her divinity to all who witnessed its passage. Dressed as Aphrodite, surrounded by servants costumed as cupids and sea nymphs, trailing perfumed smoke that could be smelled from shore, she transformed what should have been a diplomatic meeting between unequal partners into a mythological event that proclaimed her equality with the gods themselves. Antony, accustomed to the rough camaraderie of military camps and the calculating courtesans of Rome, found himself utterly disarmed by this vision of exotic splendor. The queen who stepped from her divine barge spoke to him in flawless Latin about military strategy and Roman politics, demonstrating an understanding of his world that exceeded that of many of his own advisors. By the time the evening's festivities concluded, the balance of power in their relationship had been established, not through submission, but through the irresistible force of superior preparation and presentation. Their partnership blossomed into the ancient world's most famous love affair, though love was only one element in a complex web of political, military, and economic interests that bound them together. Cleopatra provided Antony with Egypt's vast wealth and strategic position, while he offered her the military protection that could preserve her kingdom's autonomy. Their personal relationship deepened this alliance into something approaching genuine partnership, with each recognizing in the other an intellect capable of matching their own ambitions. The twins born of their union, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, were named for the sun and moon, celestial bodies that symbolized the global scope of their parents' dreams. A third child, Ptolemy Philadelphus, would follow, cementing a dynasty that promised to unite East and West under divine rule. These children represented more than mere heirs. They were the physical manifestation of a new world order that would transcend the traditional boundaries between Greek, Egyptian, and Roman civilizations. In Alexandria, their court became a center of learning and luxury that rivaled Rome itself, attracting scholars, artists, and philosophers from across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra's patronage revitalized the great library and museum, while her support for scientific research led to advances in astronomy, medicine, and engineering that would influence human knowledge for centuries. She understood that cultural leadership was as important as military might in establishing lasting dominance. The political arrangement they created through the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE revealed the true scope of their vision. By proclaiming their children rulers of various eastern territories and positioning themselves as the new gods of a restored Hellenistic empire, they directly challenged Rome's claim to universal dominion. It was a declaration of war couched in ceremonial language, but its implications were unmistakable to anyone who witnessed the spectacle. Octavian, Caesar's heir and Antony's rival for control of the Roman world, understood immediately that this Eastern alliance represented an existential threat to Roman supremacy. His propaganda machine worked tirelessly to portray the conflict not as a civil war between Roman generals, but as a struggle between civilization and barbarism, with Cleopatra cast as a foreign seductress who had corrupted a noble Roman and threatened the Republic's very survival. The naval battle at Actium in 31 BCE would determine the fate of empires, but the outcome was decided as much by politics and logistics as by military tactics. Cleopatra's fleet, magnificently equipped but crewed by Egyptians with little experience in naval warfare, proved no match for Octavian's experienced Roman sailors. When she saw the battle turning against them, her decision to withdraw with her ships has been interpreted as either cowardice or cold calculation, a final attempt to preserve some portion of her forces for a continued struggle. The retreat to Alexandria marked the beginning of the end, but Cleopatra faced her approaching doom with the same intelligence and dignity that had characterized her rise to power. She used the final months to secure the succession for her children, negotiate terms that might preserve their lives, and explore every possible avenue of escape or resistance. When all hope of military victory faded, she began planning the exit that would transform her defeat into legend. The snake that allegedly delivered her death bite has become history's most famous serpent, though scholars debate whether she actually died from cobra venom or from some other poison self-administered with characteristic flair for the dramatic. What matters is not the precise method, but the meaning she invested in her final act. By choosing the manner and timing of her death, she denied Octavian the triumph of parading her through Rome as a captive queen. Her suicide on August 12, 30th of BCE, ended the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for 3 centuries and marked the beginning of a new era in which Rome would dominate the entire Mediterranean world. Yet in death, she achieved a form of immortality that eluded most conquerors. The image of the beautiful queen who had loved and been loved by Rome's greatest generals became embedded in human imagination with a power that no military victory could match. The historical Cleopatra was far more complex than the seductress of popular imagination. She was a skilled administrator who spoke multiple languages, a patron of learning who supported scientific research, and a political strategist who understood the dynamics of power in ways that few of her contemporaries could match. Her use of sexuality as a political weapon was neither unprecedented nor particularly shocking by the standards of her time. What made her remarkable was the intelligence with which she wielded every tool at her disposal. Her economic policies transformed Egypt into the Mediterranean's most prosperous kingdom, while her cultural patronage created a flowering of arts and sciences that rivaled the achievements of classical Athens. The Alexandria over which she ruled was a cosmopolitan center where Greek philosophy mingled with Egyptian wisdom and Roman practicality, creating a synthesis that influenced human thought for centuries after her death. The propaganda war that Octavian waged against her memory has obscured many of her genuine achievements, but recent scholarship has begun to restore a more balanced understanding of her reign. She appears not as the decadent Oriental queen of Roman imagination, but as a sophisticated ruler who understood that Egypt's survival in a Roman-dominated world required extraordinary diplomatic skill and unwavering determination. Her influence on subsequent history extends far beyond the immediate consequences of her political choices. The image of the powerful woman who used her sexuality strategically rather than being victimized by it has inspired countless imitations and interpretations, from Shakespeare's tragic queen to Hollywood's glamorous temptress. Each generation has reimagined Cleopatra according to its own preoccupations, making her a mirror for changing attitudes toward power, sexuality, and female ambition. The archaeological evidence that emerges from Alexandria's underwater ruins continues to reveal new aspects of her reign, from the grandeur of her palaces to the sophistication of her administrative systems. These discoveries suggest a ruler whose achievements in governance and culture were as impressive as her romantic conquests, if less celebrated by ancient historians who preferred to focus on her personal relationships with Roman generals. In our modern era, as we grapple with questions of cultural identity, political manipulation, and the role of charismatic leadership in shaping history, Cleopatra's example remains powerfully relevant. She demonstrated that intelligence and adaptability could extend the life of even a declining empire, and that the right combination of personal magnetism and political acuity could make a small kingdom a major player on the world stage. Her story reminds us that seduction, properly understood, is not merely physical attraction, but the art of making oneself indispensable to others' dreams and ambitions. She seduced not just individual men, but entire civilizations, creating a vision of cultural synthesis and imperial grandeur that continues to captivate human imagination more than 2,000 years after her death. Today, as we witness the rise and fall of modern empires and the continuing struggles between East and West, Cleopatra's legacy speaks to the enduring power of those who refuse to accept the limitations imposed by circumstances of birth or geography. She proved that true sovereignty comes not from military might alone, but from the ability to inspire others to see the world through your eyes and to make your dreams their own. In the end, Cleopatra VII achieved something that eluded Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and every other conqueror of her era. She made herself immortal not through the empires she built or the battles she won, but through the sheer force of a personality so compelling that it continues to fascinate and inspire humanity across the centuries. She remains, in death as in life, the eternal queen of temptation, not because she was perfect, but because she dared to dream of a world remade in her own magnificent image.